The cantina smelled of alien spices and burnt metal. Commander Vexthul Morvac sat in the darkest corner of the bar, his 4 arms resting on the scarred table. 3 of those arms were not real anymore. They were metal and wires, replacing what he had lost in the war. The war that everyone said the Caltharians had won. The war that had made his people afraid to sleep at night. Zira Nethys walked toward his table. She was a reporter from the Galactic News Network. Her blue skin marked her as a Zenthari, one of the neutral species that had watched the war from far away. She carried a small recording device and wore the kind of confident smile that reporters always had when they thought they knew the whole story. Vexthul did not smile back. He had not smiled much in the 15 years since the war ended. The metal fingers of his cybernetic hand tapped against his drink glass. The sound was sharp and cold in the noisy cantina. "Commander Morvac," Zira said as she sat down across from him, "thank you for agreeing to this interview. I know you have never spoken publicly about the Terran War before." Vexthul looked at her with his one good eye. The other eye was gone, replaced by a red sensor that glowed softly in the dim light. "You would not believe me if I told you the truth," he said. His voice was rough like broken stone. Zira turned on her recording device. "The official records say that the Caltharian Empire achieved total victory over humanity in 4 years. Your forces conquered every human world and established permanent control over their territory. Humanity was absorbed into the Empire as a client species. These are facts, Commander." The old soldier laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Facts," he repeated. "Yes, that is what the records say. That is what the Galactic Council wanted everyone to believe. But you were not there, reporter. You did not see what really happened." "Then tell me what really happened," Zira said. She leaned forward, her recorder catching every word. Vexthul was quiet for a long time. He stared at his drink, watching the purple liquid swirl in the glass. Around them, other aliens talked and laughed. A group of hegemony traders argued loudly about shipping costs. 2 Vorthon mercenaries played a gambling game with glowing dice. None of them knew they were sitting near one of the most decorated veterans of the most terrible war in galactic history. "We thought they would be easy," Vexthul finally said. "The humans, I mean. They had only just discovered faster than light travel. Their weapons were primitive. They used chemical explosives and metal bullets. They had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, no quantum computers. We had conquered 100 worlds with species far more advanced than them." Zira nodded. This matched what she knew from her research. The pre-war intelligence report suggested that human resistance would last no more than 6 months. 6 months, Vexthul said with another bitter laugh. "We thought we would be home for the Harvest Festival. Our generals told us it would be a simple police action. Secure the worlds, establish order, integrate the population. Standard procedure." He took a long drink from his glass. The purple liquid burned his throat, but the pain was nothing compared to the memories that were always there, always waiting just behind his thoughts. "I was a young officer then," he continued, "full of pride for the Empire. I believed in our mission to bring civilization to the lesser species. I had fought in 12 campaigns before the human war. I had seen species surrender after the first orbital bombardment. I had seen others fight for a few weeks before accepting the inevitable. But the humans..." Vexthul paused. His metal fingers had stopped tapping. Now they gripped the edge of the table so hard that the material began to crack. "The humans were different," he said quietly. "We did not understand how different until it was too late." Zira waited. She could see that the old soldier was struggling with something. His good eye had a distant look, as if he was seeing things that were not in the cantina, things that happened long ago and far away. "The first world we hit was called New Denver," Vexthul said. "It was a farming colony with maybe 2 million humans. No military bases, no weapons factories. Just farms and small towns. The kind of world that usually surrendered as soon as our ships appeared in orbit. But they did not surrender, Zira guessed. No, they did not surrender. But that was not the strange part. Many species fight at first. What was strange was how they fought, what they were willing to do. Vexathul looked directly at Zira with his red sensor eye. The light pulsed faster now, like a heartbeat. Tell me, reporter, what would your people do if an invasion force landed on your homeworld? Zira thought about it. We would resist, of course. Organize military units, evacuate civilians, try to get help from our allies. Exactly. Standard resistance protocols. Protect the non-combatants, preserve infrastructure, minimize casualties. That is what civilized beings do in war. And the humans did not do this? Vexthul shook his head slowly. The humans did something that we had never seen before in all our conquests. Something that went against every rule of civilized warfare. Something that should have been impossible. He finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. The cantina noise seemed to fade around them. Other conversations became distant murmurs. They turned their own civilians into weapons, Vexthul said. Not just soldiers, not just military personnel. Farmers, teachers, factory workers, children, barely old enough to walk. They all became part of their war machine. And they did it in ways that still give me nightmares. Zira felt a chill run through her blue skin. What do you mean? I mean that the humans taught us something terrible about war, Vexthul said. They taught us that there is something worse than dying in battle. Something worse than losing your world to invaders. They taught us that there are beings in this galaxy who will do absolutely anything to protect what they love. Anything at all. The old soldier stood up slowly. His cybernetic legs made soft whirring sounds as they supported his weight. The official records are lies, he said. We did not win the war. We survived it. Barely. And the reason the truth was buried is because if the other species knew what humans are really capable of, they would never sleep peacefully again. Zira looked up at him. Will you tell me the real story? Vexthul was quiet for a moment. Then he sat back down. Yes, he said. It is time someone knew the truth about the humans and their terrible war. Vexthul ordered another drink before he continued his story. The purple liquid helped numb the memories, but nothing could make them go away completely. Zira waited patiently, her recorder still running. She could sense that the old soldier was about to tell her something that would change everything she thought she knew about the war. New Denver was supposed to be simple, Vexthul began. Our intelligence said it was a peaceful agricultural world. The humans grew food crops and raised livestock. They had small towns connected by primitive roads. No orbital defenses, no military installations worth mentioning. Captain Jake Morrison commanded their local security force, but it was just 20 men with basic weapons. Zira checked her notes. The official reports say that New Denver was secured within 6 hours of landing. That is what we reported to command, Vexthul said, because that is what we thought had happened. We were wrong. He took a sip of his drink and continued. I was part of the 3rd landing force. We came down in dropships just after dawn, local time. The plan was standard occupation protocol, secure the government buildings, disable communications, round up any military personnel. Simple and clean. The old soldier's metal fingers began their tapping again. Tap, tap, tap against the table. The first sign that something was wrong came when we reached the central town. It was called Millbrook. Population about 50,000. We expected to find crowds of humans hiding in their homes. Maybe some scattered resistance from local police. Instead, we found empty streets. They had evacuated? No, they were there, all of them, but they were not hiding. They were waiting. Vexthul paused, his good eyes staring at something Zira could not see. Something in his past that still haunted him. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was the first human we encountered. She was standing in the middle of the main street, wearing a simple blue dress. No weapons, No armor, just a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes. My squad leader ordered her to surrender. She smiled at us and said something I will never forget. What did she say? She said, "Welcome to New Denver. We have been waiting for you." Then she pressed a button on a small device in her hand. The tapping stopped. Vex Thul's metal fingers were gripping the table again. The entire town exploded. Zira felt her breath catch. What? Not all at once, but building by building, street by street. The humans had turned their own homes into bombs. Every house, every shop, every structure that we might use for shelter or command posts. They had spent weeks preparing for our arrival, filling basements with explosives, rigging gas lines to blow, setting up chain reactions that would bring down whole city blocks. The old soldier took another drink. His hand was shaking slightly. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that they stayed inside. The humans stayed in their homes when they blew them up. Parents with their children, elderly people who could barely walk. They all stayed and died together rather than let us use their city. Zira stared at him. That is impossible. No species would sacrifice their own civilians like that. That is what we thought too, Vex Thul said. But we were learning that humans do not think like other species. They do not follow the normal rules. He paused and looked around the cantina. The normal sounds of alien conversation and laughter seemed strange after what he had just told her. How could beings laugh and enjoy themselves when such terrible things existed in the galaxy? Lieutenant Rodriguez survived the first explosion, Vex Thul continued. She was standing at the center of it all, covered in dust and blood, but still alive. My squad surrounded her. Our medic tried to treat her wounds, but she pushed him away. She looked right at me and said, "You will never have our world. We will burn it all before we let you take it." What happened to her? She activated another device. This one brought down the whole city center. She died with a smile on her face. Zira was quiet for a long moment. She was beginning to understand why the old soldier looked so haunted. How many civilians died in Millbrook? All of them, Vex Thul said simply. 50,000 humans chose death over surrender. But they did not just die. They made sure their deaths cost us as much as possible. The reporter tried to process this information. It went against everything she knew about warfare, about survival, about rational behavior. Surely this was an isolated incident. One town, driven to desperation. Vex Thul laughed, but again there was no humor in it. That is what we told ourselves too. Command decided that Millbrook was an anomaly. Maybe the humans there were part of some extremist cult. Maybe they had been driven insane by fear, so we moved on to the next target. And the next town was called Riverside, population 30,000. We approached more carefully this time, expecting another trap. But Riverside seemed normal. The humans came out to meet us with white flags. They said they wanted to negotiate surrender terms. Vex Thul finished his second drink and immediately ordered a third. The memories were getting harder to bear. Ben Carter was the town's mayor, a big man with gray hair and kind eyes. He spoke our language well and seemed reasonable. He said his people would cooperate fully if we guaranteed their safety. He even offered to help us establish a command post. But it was another trap? Yes and no. Carter was telling the truth about cooperating. But his definition of cooperation was not what we expected. The old soldier received his third drink and took a large gulp before continuing. Carter led us to the town's main factory. It produced farming equipment for the whole region. He said we could use it as our base of operations. The building was large, defensible, and had good communications equipment. It seemed perfect. Vex Thul set down his glass and looked directly at Zira. What Carter did not tell us was that he had spent the previous week modifying every piece of machinery in that factory. He had turned tractors into rolling bombs, assembly, lines into explosive traps, and the main power generator into a weapon that could level 6 city blocks. He was planning to kill you all? No. He was planning to kill himself and as many of us as possible, but only if we tried to use force against his people. Carter gave us a choice. He said we could leave Riverside in peace, or we could try to occupy it and discover what 50,000 desperate humans could do to an invading army. Zira leaned forward. What did your commander decide? Colonel Tekvar was a proud warrior. He had never retreated from any enemy. He ordered Carter arrested and told him that the Caltharian Empire does not negotiate with primitives. Vex Thul's metal hand was tapping again. The sound seemed louder now, more urgent. Carter just nodded. Then he said something that I still hear in my dreams. He said, "I am sorry you made that choice. We really did want to find a peaceful solution." The old soldier paused, gathering his strength to continue the terrible story. What happened next changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. Carter activated his devices, but not all. At once, he triggered them in sequence, creating a chain reaction that lasted for hours. But he did something else too, something worse. What? He made sure that every human in Riverside knew exactly what was going to happen. He gave them all time to escape if they wanted to, time to run away and save themselves. Zira waited for him to continue. None of them ran, Vexthul said quietly. 30,000 humans chose to stay and die with their town rather than let us have it. Men, women, children, babies, they all stayed. And as they died, they smiled. They actually smiled because they knew their deaths would hurt us more than their lives ever could. The cantina seemed very quiet now. Other conversations had stopped. Other aliens were looking toward their table, sensing that something important was being discussed. That was when we realized, Vexthul said, that we were not fighting a normal war against a normal enemy. We were fighting against beings who loved their freedom more than they loved their own lives. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the Caltharian Empire had ever faced. The cantina had grown quieter around them. Other aliens seemed to sense that something serious was happening at the corner table. Zira noticed that several nearby conversations had stopped completely. The beings closest to them were straining to hear what the old Caltharian soldier was saying. Vexthul did not seem to notice the attention. His good eye was fixed on his glass, watching the purple liquid swirl as he spoke. The red sensor where his other eye used to be pulsed steadily, like a mechanical heartbeat. After Riverside, Command decided to change tactics, he said. No more close-quarters occupation. No more trying to secure human settlements intact. The new orders were simple. Orbital bombardment followed by ground forces to clean up survivors. Zira made notes on her portable device. That sounds like standard doctrine for dealing with fanatic resistance. It should have worked, Vexthul agreed. We had used the same approach on dozens of other worlds. Destroy the major population centers from orbit, then land to mop up scattered survivors. Most species surrender when they realize their cities are gone. He took another sip of his drink. The alcohol was starting to affect him, making his words slightly slurred, but the memories remained sharp and clear. The first target was New Houston, major industrial center, 2 million inhabitants. We hit it with everything we had. Plasma bombardment, kinetic strikes, fusion warheads. When we were finished, the city was a crater 50 kilometers wide. And the survivors surrendered? There were no survivors in New Houston, Vexthul said. But the humans on other worlds did not surrender. Instead, they did something that we had never encountered before, something that broke our soldiers' minds. The old warrior ordered another drink, his fourth. Zira was beginning to worry about how much he was consuming, but she did not want to interrupt his story. The humans began broadcasting, Vexthul continued. Not military communications or propaganda, personal messages. Dr. Ryan Bell was leading their psychological warfare division. He was a medical officer who had served in several human conflicts before our invasion. What kind of messages? Messages to us, to individual Caltharian soldiers. Bell somehow had access to our personnel files, our family records, our personal histories. He would broadcast directly to our ships and bases, addressing specific soldiers by name. Vexthul's metal fingers had stopped tapping. Now they were pressed flat against the table, as if he was trying to hold on to something solid and real. I remember the first time I heard my name on their broadcasts. Bell spoke in perfect Caltharian, with the accent of my home province. He said, "Commander Vexthul Morvac, son of engineer Kraltek Morvac and teacher Silvana Morvac, born in the city of Veltagar on the third moon of Caltharia Prime." Zira felt a chill. How could they possibly know such detailed information? We never found out. But Bell knew everything about us, our families, our fears, our hopes. He knew that I had a younger sister named Kivara who was studying to become a healer. He knew that my mother had died when I was 12 years old. He knew that I had nightmares about the Battle of Corvin's Gate where I lost my first squad. The old soldier's voice was getting quieter. Zira had to lean forward to hear him. But Bell did not use this information to threaten us or mock us. That is what made it so terrible. He used it to remind us that we were people, that we had families who loved us, that we had lives worth living. I do not understand. How is that psychological warfare? Vexthul looked up at her with his one good eye. The pain in that look was almost unbearable to see, because he made us think about what we were doing. Every time we prepared to bomb another human city, Bell would broadcast the names and families of every Caltharian involved in the attack. He would remind us of our children, our parents, our hopes for the future. Then he would ask us one simple question. What question? He would ask, "Is this what you want your family to remember about you? Is this the legacy you want to leave behind?" Zira began to understand. It made your soldiers hesitate. Worse than that, it made them think. And thinking soldiers are dangerous soldiers, especially when they are fighting a war that makes no sense. Vexthul drained his glass and signaled for another. The bartender, a six-armed Vorthon, brought the drink quickly. He too seemed interested in the conversation. The broadcasts got worse, Vexthul continued. Bell brought in other humans to help him. Kate Foster was a communications specialist who had lost her entire family in the bombing of New Houston. But instead of wanting revenge, she wanted to save lives. Save Caltharian lives? Yes. Foster would intercept our military communications and play them back to us, but edited. She would take recordings of our soldiers calling for help, crying in pain, begging for medical assistance. Then she would broadcast these recordings during quiet moments when our troops were resting or eating. The old soldier's hands were shaking. Now, the alcohol and the memories were both taking their toll. The effect was devastating. Our soldiers began to hear their own voices, their own pain, their own fear. They heard themselves as the humans heard them. Not as conquerors or warriors, but as frightened young people far from home, dying for reasons they did not fully understand. Zira was writing frantically, trying to capture every detail. This was unlike any account of the war she had ever heard. There was one broadcast that destroyed an entire regiment, Vexthul said. Foster had captured a recording of Private Zekniel Korvac calling for his mother as he died from radiation poisoning after the siege of New Berlin. She played that recording back to his unit during their next assault. What happened? Half the regiment refused to fight. They laid down their weapons and asked to be taken prisoner. The other half attacked their own officers when they were ordered to continue the advance. Vexthul finished his fifth drink. He was definitely drunk now, but his words were still clear. The memories were too strong to be blurred by alcohol. But the worst human was Paul Mitchell. He was an engineer who designed what we called the ghost ships, empty vessels that appeared to be manned but were actually automated. They would approach our positions slowly, broadcasting surrender messages, asking for help. Trojan horses? No, that was the horrible part. They really were surrender ships, but they were empty. The humans had programmed them to act exactly like ships full of desperate, defeated refugees. They would limp toward our forces, sending distress signals, begging for medical assistance. Zira was confused. If they were empty, what was the purpose? To make us paranoid, to make us afraid of our own compassion. Every time we tried to help what appeared to be human refugees, we would find empty ships. Every time we responded to distress calls, we would discover automated broadcasts. Mitchell had weaponized our mercy. The old soldier laughed bitterly. Within months, we stopped responding to any human distress signals at all. We assumed every cry for help was fake. Every surrender offer was a trick, and that is exactly what Mitchell wanted. Why? Because eventually some of those ships really did carry human refugees. Real families with children who needed help. Real wounded soldiers who wanted to surrender. And we ignored them all. We let them die because we had become afraid to show mercy. Vex Thul's red sensor eye was pulsing faster now, almost frantically. Mitchell had turned us into the kind of beings we never wanted to be. Soldiers who were afraid to save lives. Warriors who could not tell the difference between enemies and victims. He had made us into monsters, and we knew it. The cantina was completely silent now. Every alien in the place was listening to the old soldier's story. Even the bartender had stopped working and was staring at their table. The psychological warfare was worse than any weapon, Vex Thul said quietly. It did not kill our bodies. It killed our souls. It made us question everything we believed about ourselves, about our cause, about the meaning of honor and duty. He looked directly at Zira. That is when we began to understand that the humans were not just fighting to win. They were fighting to change us, to turn us into something different, something broken. And it was working. Vex Thul nodded slowly. By the end of the second year, we had more soldiers requesting transfer off the human front than we had requesting transfer to it. Command had to start using conscripts and criminals to fill the ranks. No career officer wanted to fight humans anymore. He stood up unsteadily. But the worst was yet to come. What I am about to tell you next will explain why the Galactic Council buried the truth about this war, why they decided that some secrets are too dangerous to share. Vex Thul sat back down heavily. The alcohol was affecting his balance, but his mind remained sharp and focused on the terrible memories he was sharing. Around them, the cantina had fallen completely silent. Even the background music had stopped. Every being in the place was listening to his story now. Zira checked her recording device to make sure it was still working. What she was hearing would change galactic history. No one had ever told this version of the human war before. The third year of the war was when everything fell apart, Vex Thul began. Command decided that the psychological warfare was getting out of hand. They ordered a full assault on Earth itself, the human homeworld. If we could take that, the resistance would collapse. He paused to gather his thoughts. The next part of the story was clearly the most difficult for him to tell. Earth had no orbital defenses that could stop our fleet, no weapons that could seriously damage our ships. We expected the final battle to last maybe a week, maybe less. But it did not. The battle lasted 3 days. We won, of course. Human technology was still far behind ours. But winning the battle was not the same as winning the war. Because the humans had prepared something that none of us saw coming. Vex Thul ordered another drink, his sixth. His hands were shaking badly now, and not just from the alcohol. Luna Base was the command center for Earth's defensive forces, a small facility on their moon with maybe 200 military personnel. Commander Alex Turner was in charge. We had been monitoring his communications for months, so we knew he was a career soldier. Tough, professional, dedicated to his duty. The old soldier took a long drink before continuing. When our ground forces landed at Luna Base, Turner did something unprecedented. He ordered his troops to lay down their weapons and surrender immediately. No fight, no resistance, no heroic last stand. Just complete and immediate surrender. Zira frowned. That seems reasonable. Why was it unprecedented? because no human commander had ever surrendered before. In 3 years of war, we had never taken a single human prisoner. They always fought to the death or killed themselves, rather than be captured. Turner was the first to break that pattern. Vex Thul's red sensor eye was pulsing rapidly now, almost strobing in the dim light of the cantina. We should have been suspicious. We should have realized it was another trap. But our soldiers were exhausted from 3 years of fighting fanatics. They were relieved to finally face humans who acted rationally. So Turner and his people were taken prisoner? Yes, all 200 of them. They were transported to our main prison ship, the Drakthul. It was a massive vessel designed to hold thousands of captives from multiple worlds. The humans were just a tiny fraction of the total prison population. Vex Thul paused again. He seemed to be struggling with something, as if the words he needed to say were physically painful. What Turner did next broke every rule of warfare that has existed since the first galactic civilization. He turned our own prison into a weapon against us. How? By being kind, Zira stared at him. What do you mean? I mean that Turner and his soldiers began treating their guards, their interrogators, even their fellow prisoners, with genuine compassion and respect. They shared their food rations with hungry guards. They helped wounded Caltharian soldiers who were being treated in the prison medical bay. They offered friendship to beings who had been ordered to hate them. The old soldier's voice was getting quieter again. Zira had to strain to hear him over the silence of the cantina. Turner spoke perfect Caltharian, better than most of our own soldiers. He knew our history, our culture, our values. But instead of using this knowledge to manipulate us, he used it to connect with us. I still do not understand how this was a weapon. Vex Thul looked up at her with an expression of infinite sadness, because it made us realize that we were the villains in this war. He finished his drink in one gulp and continued. Turner would sit with the guards during their meal breaks and ask them about their families. He would listen to their problems, their fears, their hopes for the future. He never judged them for being part of the invasion force. He never blamed them for the destruction of human worlds. He just treated them as people. The old soldier's metal fingers were tapping again, but slower now. The sound was almost hypnotic. Grace Peterson was Turner's chief medical officer. She had lost her husband and children in the bombing of New Dallas. But when Caltharian prisoners were brought to the medical bay, she treated them with the same care she would give to her own people. Even after losing her family, especially after losing her family. Peterson said that healing was the only way to honor their memory. She said that saving lives was more important than taking revenge. Vex Thul ordered another drink. The bartender hesitated, clearly concerned about how much the old soldier had already consumed. But Vex Thul's red sensor eye fixed on him, and the Vorthan quickly brought the alcohol. The worst incident happened when War Prince Zektar Kethis was brought to the prison ship. He was the commander who had ordered the destruction of 3 human colonies. Over 6 million humans had died because of his decisions. Zira knew that name from her research. Kethis was considered one of the heroes of the Caltharian Empire. His tactics had been studied in military academies across the galaxy. Kethis had been wounded in a shuttle crash. Internal injuries, radiation poisoning, multiple fractures. He was dying slowly and in great pain. The prison medical staff could have kept him comfortable, but they could not save him. Vex Thul paused to take a sip of his new drink. Peterson volunteered to operate on him personally. She spent 18 hours in surgery, using techniques that most Caltharian doctors did not even know. She saved his life. The woman who lost her family saved the life of the being who killed them? Yes. And when Kethis woke up and realized what had happened, he asked Peterson why she had done it. Do you know what she told him? Zira shook her head. She said, because you have a family too. Because somewhere in the galaxy there are people who love you and want you to come home. I could not take that away from them. even if you took it away from me." The old soldier's voice broke slightly as he said this. He had to stop and compose himself before continuing. That conversation changed everything. Kethis spent the next 3 months in that prison, recovering from his injuries, and every day he talked with Turner and Peterson and the other human prisoners. They told him about their lives, their dreams, their hopes for peace. What happened to him? He requested transfer to a different command. Then he requested early retirement. Then he disappeared entirely. The last anyone heard, he was living on a neutral world somewhere in the Outer Rim, working as a teacher. Vexthul's red sensor eye had stopped pulsing. Now it glowed steadily, like a dying star. But Kethis was not the only one affected. Within 6 months, we had guards requesting transfer away from the Drakthul, not because the duty was dangerous or difficult, but because they could not bear to keep humans imprisoned. Why? Because the humans had shown them what real strength looked like. Not the strength to destroy enemies, but the strength to forgive them. Not the power to take revenge, but the power to choose mercy instead. The old soldier looked around the cantina. Every alien there was staring at him now, hanging on his every word. By the 4th year of the war, we had more Caltharian deserters than active soldiers. Not because they were afraid of dying, but because they were afraid of continuing to serve a cause that the humans had proven was wrong. Vexthul stood up again, swaying slightly. Turner had done something that no military strategist in galactic history had ever attempted. He had weaponized forgiveness. He had turned our own sense of honor and decency against our ability to wage war. And it worked? It worked so well that the High Command was forced to negotiate for peace. Not because we could not win militarily, but because we could no longer convince our own soldiers to fight. The old soldier started walking toward the exit of the cantina. Zira grabbed her recording device and followed him. But the most terrible thing, Vexthul said as they reached the door, was that we realized the humans had been right all along. We were the invaders. We were the destroyers. We were the ones who brought death and suffering to innocent worlds. Stopped and looked back at her one last time. Turner did not just defeat us. He made us defeat ourselves. And that is why the truth about this war can never be allowed to spread. Because if other species learned what humans are capable of, every empire in the galaxy would fall apart within a generation. Outside the cantina, the night air of Crossroads Prime was cold and sharp. The space station rotated slowly, creating artificial gravity and a gentle breeze that carried the sense of 100 different worlds. Vexthul leaned against the metal railing that overlooked the central plaza, his cybernetic legs supporting him as he swayed from the alcohol. Zira stood beside him, her recording device still running. She could sense that the old soldier had more to say. The most important part of his story was yet to come. The peace negotiations were unlike anything in galactic history, Vexthul said finally. His voice was clearer now that they were in the fresh air. Captain Rick Stone represented the human government. I was part of the Caltharian delegation. You were present at the peace talks? I was there because High Command wanted someone who had actually fought the humans, someone who understood what we were really dealing with. They thought my experience would help us get better terms in the surrender. Vexthul laughed bitterly. They still did not understand. Even after 4 years of war, they still thought the humans would negotiate like a normal species. Below them, aliens from dozens of worlds walked through the plaza. Traders, diplomats, tourists, refugees, all living their lives in peace because the great empires had learned to coexist. Most of them had no idea how fragile that peace really was. Stone arrived alone, Vexthul continued. No guards, no advisors, no weapons, just one human in a simple gray uniform. He looked tired, like he had not slept in months, but his eyes were clear and determined. What were his terms? That was the first shock. Stone did not present terms. Instead, he asked us what we needed. Zira blinked in surprise. What do you mean? I mean that instead of demanding reparations or territory or revenge, Stone asked what the Caltharian Empire needed in order to stop fighting. He said that humans wanted peace, not victory. He said they wanted to end the suffering on both sides. The old soldier gripped the railing with his metal hands. The memory was clearly still painful, even after 15 years. Our lead negotiator, General Krevthak Morvain, demanded unconditional human surrender. He said that despite recent setbacks, the Empire still had the military strength to crush human resistance completely. How did Stone respond? He agreed. Vexthul turned to look at Zira directly. Stone said that if the Caltharian Empire truly believed that conquest was the only path to peace, then humanity would surrender unconditionally. All human worlds would submit to imperial rule. All human military forces would be disbanded. All human technology would be transferred to Caltharian control. That seems too easy. That is what General Morvain thought, too. He demanded to know what the catch was, what hidden trap the humans had prepared. Vexthul paused to watch a group of hegemony children playing in the plaza below. Their laughter echoed off the metal walls of the station, a sound of pure joy that seemed impossible after the dark story he had been telling. Stone said there was no catch, but he made one request. He asked that before we accepted humanity's surrender, we spend 1 week on Earth, not as conquerors or occupiers, but as guests. He wanted us to see what we would be taking control of. And you agreed to this? General Morvain was suspicious, but curious. He thought it might be an opportunity to gather intelligence about human defenses and resources. So our entire delegation traveled to Earth. Vexthul ordered another drink from a passing service robot. His 8th of the evening, but somehow he seemed more sober now, as if the importance of what he was saying was burning away the effects of the alcohol. What we found on Earth changed everything. The humans had spent the 4 years of war rebuilding their world into something incredible. Not just repairing the damage from our attacks, but creating something better than what had been there before. Better how? They had eliminated poverty. Every human had food, shelter, medical care, education. They had cleaned their polluted oceans and restored their damaged ecosystems. They had built cities that were works of art, not just functional structures. The old soldier took a sip of his drink and continued. But that was not the most impressive part. The most impressive part was how they treated each other. No crime, no violence, no hatred between different groups. They had learned to live together in perfect harmony. Zira made notes, frantically. This was completely different from any account of post-war Earth she had ever read. Stone took us to schools where human children were learning Caltharian history and culture alongside their own. He showed us hospitals where human doctors had developed new treatments specifically designed for alien physiology. He introduced us to artists who had created sculptures and paintings celebrating the beauty of non-human life forms. They were preparing to be conquered? No, they were preparing to be friends. Vexthul's red sensor eye began to pulse again, but slowly this time, like a peaceful heartbeat. Admiral Nina Walsh commanded Earth's largest medical facility. She had converted it specifically to treat wounded Caltharian soldiers. Not prisoners or casualties from our own forces, but Caltharians who had been injured fighting humans and then abandoned by their own commanders. How did she get access to Caltharian wounded? Human rescue ships had been collecting them from battlefields across the war zone. Soldiers who had been left for dead, pilots whose ships had crashed on hostile worlds, sailors whose vessels had been destroyed in space. The humans had been saving our people and bringing them to Earth for treatment. Zira felt a chill run through her. How many? Over 10,000 Caltharian military personnel, all receiving the best medical care that human science could provide, all free to leave whenever they chose, all being treated not as enemies, but as patients who needed help. The old soldier finished his drink and set the glass on the railing. I met some of those soldiers during our visit. They told me stories that I still have trouble believing. Stories of human medics who had risked their lives to rescue Caltharian wounded from burning ships. Stories of human families who had opened their homes to alien refugees. Stories of human scientists who had worked around the clock to develop new medicines for alien diseases. What did your delegation think of all this? We were confused at first, then suspicious, then terrified, because we began to realize that the humans had not been fighting to defeat us. They had been fighting to save us. Vexthul looked up at the artificial sky of the space station. Stars and nebulae were projected on the ceiling, creating the illusion of open space, but he seemed to be seeing something else entirely. On the last day of our visit, Stone took us to a memorial that humans had built for the war dead. But it was not just a memorial for human casualties, it honored every being who had died in the conflict from both sides. Caltharian names were included, every single one. Every Caltharian soldier who had died fighting humans was remembered there. Their names, their ranks, their home worlds. Human families had researched the personal history of every enemy casualty and created individual monuments for each one. The old soldier's voice was getting quieter again, but not from alcohol this time. From emotion. There was a statue of War Prince Zektar Kethis, not the version of him that had ordered the destruction of human colonies, but the version that had existed before the war. A young officer who had wanted to explore the galaxy and make contact with new civilizations. The humans remembered him as he had dreamed of being, not as he had become. How did this make you feel? It made me understand that the humans had won the war before it ever started, not through superior weapons or tactics, but through superior wisdom. They had found a way to defeat enemies without destroying them, a way to win without making others lose. Vexthul turned away from the railing and began walking slowly down the corridor. Zira followed, still recording. The peace treaty was signed 3 days later, but it was not the document that General Morvain had expected to negotiate. It was not even really a treaty in the traditional sense. What was it? It was an invitation for the Caltharian Empire to join a new kind of galactic community, one based on cooperation instead of conquest, one where strength was measured by the ability to help others, not the ability to defeat them. They reached a transport hub where shuttles carried passengers to different parts of the station. Vexthul stopped and leaned against a support pillar. Professor Martha Johnson runs the Caltharian Studies program at Harvard University on Earth. My son Kevlar is one of her students. He is learning about human philosophy, human art, human science, but more importantly, he is learning about human values. Zira looks surprised. Your son lives on Earth? He chose to go there after the war ended. Many young Caltharians did. They wanted to understand how humans had created such a perfect society. They wanted to learn the secrets of living without violence, without hatred, without fear. The old soldier smiled for the first time since the interview had begun. It was a sad smile, but genuine. Lieutenant General Carl Davis commands the Joint Human Caltharian Peacekeeping Force. Half his officers are former enemies who now work together to prevent conflicts in other parts of the galaxy. They have stopped 3 wars in the last decade, simply by showing other species that there is an alternative to violence. And this is why the truth was hidden? Vexthul nodded slowly. The Galactic Council realized that if other empires learned what humans were capable of, it would destabilize everything. Every species would demand the same kind of leadership that humans had demonstrated. Every war would end not with victory and defeat, but with transformation and growth. He straightened up and looked directly at Zira. The humans did not just win our war. They ended the concept of war itself. They proved that the strongest civilizations are not the ones that can destroy their enemies, but the ones that can turn their enemies into friends. Is that why you are finally telling this story? I am telling this story because my son asked me to. He said that the galaxy deserves to know the truth about human nature. He said that hiding this knowledge is preventing other species from learning to be better than they are. Vex Thul started walking toward the shuttle platform. The humans have a saying. The truth will set you free. I think it is time for the galaxy to be free. As he disappeared into the crowd of alien passengers, Zira stood alone with her recording device, knowing that she held the most important story in galactic history. A story that would change everything, just as the humans had changed everything 15 years ago. The truth about humanity's terrifying war tactics was finally going to be told.